Clara Whitmore pressed her back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. She did not pray for rescue. She had stopped praying 3 years ago. She only prayed it would end quickly. Then the door opened. Not Jed's slow, threatening creak. This was different. Heavy boots. One step. Then silence. A voice low, steady, unfamiliar cut through the dark. "Ma'am, step away from him. Right now." Clara looked up. A tall man stood in the doorway. Dusty coat. Weathered face. Eyes that saw everything. For the first time in 3 years, someone had walked through that door for her. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1885 came to Millfield, Colorado, like a slow fire. It did not arrive with thunder. It crept in quiet, relentless, burning everything down from the inside. The kind of heat that made animals restless and men cruel. And in a small cabin at the edge of the Millfield Valley, Clara Whitmore had learned that cruelty did not need a season. It lived here year-round. She had not always been afraid of mornings. There was a time before Jed, before the wedding, before the first time his hand found her face, when Clara loved the early hours. When she would open her parents' bakery before sunrise and feel the warmth of the oven like a second heartbeat. That Clara was gone. The Clara who stood at the kitchen stove now moved carefully, quietly, every step measured, every sound controlled, because Jed Holt slept light, and a dropped pan, a scraped chair, a door that creaked at the wrong angle, any of it could turn the morning into something she would carry in her body for weeks. She had learned this. She had learned everything about surviving Jed Holt. Where to stand so a blow wouldn't knock her into the furniture. How to keep her voice flat and agreeable even when her hands were shaking. How to look at the floor without looking defeated, because Jed hated defeat almost as much as he hated defiance. She cracked 3 eggs into the iron skillet and said nothing. The sizzle filled the silence. She kept her eyes forward. Jed appeared in the doorway of the kitchen at 6:30. He was a broad man, not tall, but dense built, like something quarried from rock. Brown hair that hadn't seen a barber in months. A jaw that was always clenched even when he was calm. Clara did not turn around. She knew he was there. She always knew. "Coffee ready," he said. "Yes." She poured it before he finished asking, handed it to him without meeting his eyes. "Eggs are almost done." He took the cup, said nothing for a moment. She counted his footsteps behind her. 2 toward the table. Chair scraped back. He sat. She exhaled slowly. Some mornings this was enough. Coffee. Silence. Food on the table. And Jed would leave for town without incident. She had learned not to hope for those mornings. Hoping made the other kind worse. "You sleep all night?" he asked. "I woke at 4. Couldn't go back under." She slid the eggs onto his plate and set it on the table without looking at him. "Bill Dawson says he saw you talking to Harlan Price yesterday." Clara stilled, just for half a second. Then she moved back to the stove, picked up the cloth, wiped the iron skillet. "Mr. Price came into the store when I was buying flour. He said good morning. I said good morning back." "That all?" "That's all, Jed." Another silence. She could feel him watching her back. That particular stillness he had the way a storm sometimes paused before it broke. "You're lying," he said. She turned then, not quickly. She had learned that quick movements provoked him. Slowly. She looked at him directly. "I'm not lying. He said good morning. I said good morning. I came straight home." Something shifted in his face. She saw it. She had memorized every change in Jed Holt's face over 3 years. The way his left eye narrowed slightly before he decided something. The way his jaw muscle jumped. "You think I'm stupid," he said quietly. "No, Jed, I don't. You think I don't hear things in this town. I think people in this town say whatever they want to say." He stood up. She did not step back. She had learned that stepping back only told him he had already won. "I'm telling you the truth," she said. Her voice was flat, deliberate. Harlan Price said good morning. That is the whole conversation. Jed looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup and walked out the back door. Clara stood in the kitchen until she heard the barn door slide open. Then she sat down on the wooden floor. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in almost a year. She just sat there with her back against the cabinet and her eyes on the ceiling, and she breathed. In, out. You survived another morning, she told herself. That's enough for now. She had married Jed Holt when she was 24 years old. The town of Millfield had called it a good match. Jed owned property. Jed had money in the Millfield Bank. Jed was known as a man of discipline and strong values. Her mother had cried at the wedding happy tears, she'd said. Clara remembered standing at the altar and thinking that Jed Holt seemed like a practical man. Not romantic, not gentle, but solid, reliable. She had not understood then the difference between a man who was solid and a man who used his weight against you. The first time Jed hit her was 6 weeks after the wedding. She had burned his supper. Just the bread a little too long in the oven, the crust gone dark on one side. She remembered apologizing. She remembered saying she would make something else. She remembered thinking he would be annoyed, nothing more. She did not remember falling. She remembered being on the kitchen floor. She remembered the side of her face, feeling like it had been split open. She remembered looking up at Jed standing over her with the expression of a man who had simply corrected an accounting error. "You don't waste food in this house," he said. Then he sat down at the table and waited for her to make something else. She did. Because what else was there been? She told no one. Who would she tell Sheriff Dunmore was Jed's cousin? The pastor at the church had once told Clara in a moment she would never forget that a woman's first duty is the peace of her home. Her neighbors, the women who saw the bruises she couldn't always hide, looked away. Not because they didn't see. Because they did. They saw and they looked away, and in that looking away, they said everything Clara needed to know about what kind of help she could expect from Millfield, Colorado. She was Jed Holt's wife. That was her category. That was her life. Her parents were gone. Her father 5 years before the wedding. Her mother 2 years after a winter illness that Clara had always privately believed was more broken heart than sickness. The bakery was sold to pay debts. There was nothing left of before. There was only this cabin, this valley, this man, and Clara surviving. That Tuesday in July, the day that would later feel like the axis around which the rest of her life turned, began like every other day. Jed left for town after breakfast. He had business with a man about a land deal. He would be gone until afternoon. Clara had 4 hours. She used them the way she always did, carefully, productively, like a woman who knew exactly how much peace was rationed to her. She fed the 2 remaining chickens. She repaired a section of the porch railing that had been loose for weeks. She went through the household accounts Jed kept on the desk in the front room, not because he allowed her to manage money, but because she had quietly, privately taught herself to read his books. She needed to know. She wasn't sure what she was planning. She told herself. She wasn't planning anything, but she needed to know what was real, what was in the bank, what they owned, what she might be entitled to if she ever found the courage to. She closed the ledger when she heard hooves. Too early for Jed. She stood at the front window and looked out. A rider was coming down the mountain road. Not the town road, the mountain road, the one that wound north through the pine forest and connected Millfield to the mining settlements higher up in the range. Almost nobody used that road. She watched. The rider was big. Not the exaggerated size of a man trying to look important, but the genuine scale of someone who had spent years doing physical work in difficult terrain. He sat his horse easily. A dark bay mare, trail-worn but healthy. Saddlebags packed. A rifle in the scabbard. He was not from Millfield. She could tell that immediately. Not because of his clothes, though his trail coat was different from the town men's jackets, but because of how he moved through the space, like a man who belonged to the land itself, not to any particular street or establishment. He slowed as he came near the cabin. Clara stepped back from the window. He stopped. She waited. After a moment, she heard a knock. Not aggressive, not the way Jed knocked when he'd been drinking that 3-pound sound that meant, "Open this door, or I'll open it for you." This knock was simply present, attentive, like a question. She went to the door. She opened it 6 inches. He was standing 3 feet back from the porch, which she noticed immediately, because men who wanted something usually stepped as close to the door as they could manage. Up close, he was weathered in the particular way of men who lived outdoors, not old, but marked. Late 30s, maybe 40. Dark hair going gray at the temples. A jaw covered in several days of dark stubble. Eyes the color of Winter Creek water, gray-blue, clear and direct in a way that made her want to step back and step forward at the same time. He took off his hat. She hadn't expected that. "Afternoon, ma'am." His voice was low, unhurried. He talked like a man who had spent years in places where raising your voice served no purpose. "Sorry to trouble you. I'm looking for the road to Coulter Pass. I reckon I may have missed my turn somewhere north of the ridge." She studied him for a moment. "You're about 2 miles east of where you want to be," she said. "The Coulter Pass road forks off above the old Hennessy claim. There's a split pine at the junction. The right fork looks more traveled, but it dead ends at a mining camp. You want the left fork." Something in his expression shifted a kind of quiet respect that wasn't dramatic or performed. "I'm obliged," he said. "That would have cost me half a day." He paused. "Name's Nathan Cole. I've got a small operation up near Ridgeline." She recognized the area high mountain country 20 miles north of Millfield. Almost nobody lived up there permanently. Too isolated. Too difficult. "Clara Holt," she said. He nodded once. "Thank you, Mrs. Holt." He put his hat back on. He turned toward his horse. And Clara, who had no reason in the world to say another word, who had every reason to close the door and go back to her accounting books and her rationed peace, heard herself speak. "There's water in the trough if your mare needs it." Nathan Cole stopped. He looked back at her, not at her body, the way men in town did with that particular evaluating quality, that measuring look that always made her want to draw her shawl tighter. He looked at her face. "She could use it," he said. "Thank you." He led the mare to the trough beside the fence. The horse drank deeply. Nathan stood beside her, one hand on the saddle, and he looked out at the mountain line to the north without looking back at Clara or performing any awareness of being watched. She stood in the doorway and watched him anyway. She didn't know why. She told herself it was just caution. Watching a stranger on your property was only practical. But it wasn't caution. It was something older than caution. It was the recognition of a quality she had almost forgotten existed in people. He did not take up more space than he needed. That was all. That was everything. I was gone in 10 minutes. He thanked her again, simply mounted his horse, and rode back up the mountain road without looking back. Clara stood at the window and watched him go. Then she went back to the accounts. She did not think about Nathan Cole for the rest of the afternoon. Or so she told herself. Jed came home at 3:30. She could hear it in the way he tied his horse, the tight jerking movements that meant the business in town hadn't gone the way he wanted. She moved to the stove. She had a beef stew going, his preference for dinner, something she had started at noon to be sure it would be ready. He came through the door. He looked at her. She looked at the pot. "A man came by today," she said. She said it before he could ask, before Bill Dawson or anyone else in town beat her to it. In Millfield, someone always saw everything. Better it came from her. Asking directions to Coulter Pass, he was lost off the mountain road. Jed set his hat on the hook. "What man?" "A rancher from up near Ridgeline, Nathan Cole." She kept her voice completely neutral. "I told him the route to the pass. He watered his horse and left." Jed was quiet for a long moment. "Nathan Cole," he repeated. "I don't know him. He said that was his name." Another silence. She continued stirring. "You sure that's all that happened?" "Yes, Jed." He moved into the kitchen. She focused on the stew. His hand came down on her shoulder, not hard, just present in that particular way he had, that was not quite a grip and not quite a reassurance. Somewhere in between. A reminder. "I know where you are," that hand said. "I know everything you do." "Good girl," he said. Then he went to wash before supper. Clara kept her hand on the spoon and her eyes on the pot. Good girl. 3 years. 3 years of good girl, and you're lying, and nobody else would want you, and that hand on her shoulder. She thought for just one strange, reckless second about a man who stood 3 feet back from the door and took off his hat. Then she pushed the thought away. 2 weeks passed. The heat deepened. Jed went to town most mornings on the land deal business. He was trying to acquire a stretch of valley property that connected his land to the creek, and the negotiation was grinding and contentious, and it kept him occupied and irritable in equal measure. Clara cleaned the cabin. She tended what was left of the kitchen garden. She went into town twice for supplies, walking the half-mile to Millfield and walking home again with her basket, keeping her eyes forward and her expression pleasant and unremarkable. She passed the women on the main street. Martha Cooley, whose husband beat her less than Jed did, and who therefore considered herself fortunate. The Brennan sisters, who smiled at Clara with that particular carefully calibrated pity that meant they saw everything and would do nothing. She nodded to them. She bought flour. She bought salt. She came home. She did not speak about Nathan Cole. She barely thought about Nathan Cole. But then she was coming back across the south field on a Thursday afternoon with her basket, and she looked up and saw a dark bay mare tied at the fence post by the road. Her step faltered. Just once. Then she kept walking. Nathan Cole was standing at the fence, not on the property side, the road side, and he was not looking at the cabin. He was looking at the south fence line, which had 3 posts leaning badly in the summer heat where the ground had gone soft. When he heard her, he turned. He took off his hat. Mrs. Holt. She stopped at the fence gate. Mr. Cole. He nodded toward the leaning posts. Looks like your fence is given way on this side. Ground gets soft in a wet summer, that's the trouble. Another month and you'll lose the whole south line. I know, she said. A pause. Your husband know. He knows. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Just a moment. Then he looked back at the fence. I was passing through again, heading back from Millfield. Picked up some supplies. He gestured to the saddlebags. I've got wire and a fence tool if you need a repair done. Clara looked at him. She studied his face, the directness in it, the absence of any performance or angle. Why would you do that? She asked. Because a fence line that goes to nothing is a trouble, he said simply. And because I took your directions to the pass 2 weeks ago, and it saved me half a day's ride, so I reckon I still owe you something. She should have said no. She almost said no. She thought about Jed. She thought about what Jed would say if he came home and found a man working her fence line. She thought about the ledger in the front room, and the accounts she'd been quietly adding up, and the calculations she kept telling herself had no particular purpose. The tool is in the barn, she said. I can show you where the wire is kept. Nathan Cole nodded. He tied his mare more securely and came through the gate. He worked for 2 hours. He did not talk much, which she appreciated, because a man who talked constantly was usually talking to fill something, to manage something, to steer something. Nathan's silence was different. It was the silence of a man comfortable enough in his own skin that he didn't need noise to hold himself together. She brought out water without being asked. He thanked her without ceremony. At one point he said, without looking up from where he was setting a post, "You do the books for this place." She looked at him. "What makes you ask that?" "Numbers on that ledger I could see through the window when you went back inside for the toolbox." He glanced up briefly. "The way they're written, careful, even column. That's somebody who knows what they're looking at." "I keep the household accounts," she said. He nodded and went back to the post. "My mother kept accounts for our ranch when I was a boy," he said. "She knew the operation better than my father did by the time I was 12. He just didn't like to admit it." Clara watched him work. "She's still running the ranch?" she asked. A beat. "No, ma'am," he said. "She's gone. Both my parents. Ranch went with them." "I'm sorry." He didn't answer right away. Then, long time ago. There was something in how he said it, not a bid for sympathy, not a door being opened. Just a fact being acknowledged. This is part of what I carry. I'm not asking you to carry it too. She understood that way of speaking. She used it herself. He left before Jed could come home. He seemed to understand the timing without being told. Or maybe she seemed to understand that he understood something passed between them in how he said goodbye that had nothing to do with the words themselves. "Thank you for the water," he said. "Fence line should hold through fall now." "I'm obliged," she said. He looked at her. Not at the bruise under her jaw that she'd covered with powder this morning. Not at her hands, which she knew were rougher than they should be for a woman whose husband supposedly provided for her. He looked at her. "You ever need directions to anywhere?" he said, and his voice was very quiet and very deliberate. "I know these mountains pretty well." She understood that he was not talking about directions. She looked back at him. "Good to know," she said. He put on his hat. He rode north. Clara stood at the repaired fence for a long time after he disappeared around the ridge. Jed came home at dusk. He saw the fence first. He walked the south line and came back to the porch where Clara was shelling beans. "Who fixed the fence?" he said. "I hired someone passing through," she said. Her hands kept moving. "Paid him from the household account, 50 cents. I wrote it down." Jed looked at the fence, then at her. "What someone?" "A man from Ridgeline. He was passing. He had the tools and needed the coin." She set down the bean bowl and looked at him. "The south line was about to go, Jed. Another month and we'd have lost cattle through. I handled it." Something worked in Jed's face. The conflict there, the irritation that she'd made a decision, and the acknowledgement that the decision was correct. He hated both things in equal measure. "Next time you ask me first," he said. "Next time you're here," she said, quietly, without defiance, just fact. He stared at her, then he went inside. Clara picked up her bean bowl. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that. She turned it over in her mind as the last daylight left the sky. Her hands were not shaking. For the first time in a very long time, she had made a decision, and she had stood behind it, and her hands were steady. Something small and nearly forgotten stirred in her chest. It did not feel like hope exactly. Not yet. But it felt like the place where hope had once lived. And it felt like that place was not entirely empty. Not yet. The fence held. Clara checked it every morning for a week, not because she doubted the repair, but because looking at those straight solid posts gave her something she couldn't quite name. Evidence, maybe. That something could be fixed. That something broken didn't have to stay that way. Jed never mentioned it again. That was his way. Once a thing was resolved in his mind, it ceased to exist. The fence was fixed. The account entry was noted. The man from Ridgeline was a transaction, not a person. Jed was good at reducing people to transactions. Clara had learned that the hard way. She had been a transaction herself, a wife, a cook, a keeper of the household, a body in his bed. She understood her function in his ledger. She had understood it for 3 years. But something had shifted. She couldn't have pointed to the exact moment. It wasn't the fence. It wasn't Nathan Cole's quiet voice, or the way he took off his hat, or the steadiness of her own hands after Jed came home that evening. It was something that all of those things together had pressed on like a thumb, finding a bruise she hadn't known was there. Not creating the pain, revealing it. She had stopped believing she deserved better. She couldn't have told you when that happened either. It had been gradual, the way all erosion is gradual, one small loss at a time, until you look around and the landscape is unrecognizable. But now she was looking, and what she saw frightened her almost as much as Jed did. August came in hard and dry. The mountain creeks ran low. The cattle in the valley grew restless. In Millfield, the men at the saloon argued more, and the women on the main street walked faster and kept their eyes down, the way people do when the heat makes everything feel close to breaking. Jed's land deal collapsed. She found out on a Wednesday when he came home at noon instead of late afternoon, and she heard it in the door before she heard his voice. That specific controlled fury. Quieter than rage, more dangerous than shouting. "The Hendersons pulled out," he said. She turned from the stove, said nothing, took their offer to Calloway instead. He set his hat down on the table with the careful precision of a man managing himself very deliberately. "After 3 months of negotiation, after I put good faith money down." "I'm sorry, Jed." "Are you?" It wasn't a question. She recognized that too, the way he turned statements into accusations with nothing but a change in tone. "Yes," she said simply. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that searched for something to land on. An expression wrong, a posture that suggested something, anything he could use to redirect what he was carrying. She kept her face neutral. She kept her hands at her sides. She had learned not to reach toward him when he was like this. She had learned the hard way that comfort offered at the wrong moment read to Jed like condescension. "Supper'll be another hour," she said. He picked up his hat and walked back outside. She stood in the kitchen and listened to him take his horse out again and ride toward town. She did not know when he would come back. She did not know what state he would be in when he did. She went back to the stove and kept cooking because the alternative was standing in the middle of the kitchen and letting the fear have all of her, and she had decided long ago that fear could have the edges of her. The margins. The 2 a.m. hours when she couldn't sleep. It could not have the center. Not yet. He came back at midnight. She heard him fumbling with the door from the back bedroom where she lay still and breathed slowly and listened to every sound the way she had taught herself to do, sorting them, categorizing them, reading the situation in the sounds before she had to face it. He was drunk, not badly, not the falling down kind she'd learned to almost prefer, because a man drunk enough to fall couldn't be precise about hurting someone. This was the controlled kind, 2 or 3 whiskeys, enough to strip away the thin layer of restraint he operated with during daylight hours. She closed her eyes. She heard him in the kitchen, the clank of a glass, water from the pump, his boots on the floor uneven, deliberate. Then the bedroom door. She kept her eyes closed. She kept her breathing slow. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Clara." "I'm here," she said. "The Hendersons." A pause. "You know what I think? I think someone told them something. About me. About my business." She opened her eyes. The dark of the room. The shape of him at the bed's edge. "I don't know anything about the Hendersons' business decisions." "I'm not saying you do." Another pause. Longer. "I'm saying somebody in this town has been talking, and I'd like to know who." "I don't know, Jed." She felt him turn toward her in the dark. "You talk to anyone," he said. "When you go to town for supplies, you talk to anyone about my business." "I talk to the shopkeeper," she said. "I pay for the flour and I come home." Silence. "You haven't been talking to that fence man again?" Something in her chest went very still. "No," she said, "because I made some inquiries. Nathan Cole." He said the name like he was testing the weight of it. "People say he's been in Millfield twice in the past month. Supplies. Nothing unusual, but people notice things." "I haven't spoken to him since the fence," she said. "He was passing through. He had the tools. That was the whole of it." Jed was quiet for a long moment. Then he lay down. He said nothing else. She lay beside him in the dark and did not move for a very long time. When she was certain he was asleep, she turned her face toward the window. The mountains were dark against a sky full of stars. Somewhere up there, 20 miles north past the ridge, past the split pine and the dead-end mining road, a man was sleeping in a small ranch house. A man who took off his hat. A man who stood 3 feet back from the door. A man who had said, "I know these mountains pretty well." She closed her eyes. "Stop it," she told herself. "Stop it right now." Char. But stopping it turned out to be harder than she expected. Not because she was in love with Nathan Cole, she was clear-eyed enough to know that 3 conversations and 2 hours of fence work were not a foundation for anything, but because he had done something she hadn't expected and couldn't account for. He had treated her like a person, not a wife, not a category, not a problem to be managed or a body to be evaluated, or a woman who should be grateful for basic decency. A person. And the terrible thing, the thing she lay awake understanding in the hot August dark, was how foreign that felt. How she had to reach back years past the wedding, and past the first blow, and past all the careful years of surviving, to find a memory of what it felt like to simply be seen. Her father had seen her. I used to come into the bakery in the early mornings when she was learning to proof the bread, and he would stand beside her and say, "You've got good hands for this, Clara. You feel when it's right." Not because she needed encouragement. Because it was true, and he knew it, and he thought she should know it too. She had almost forgotten what that felt like. Nathan Cole had not given her that. But he had reminded her it existed, and that was more dangerous in its way than anything else. Chepe. The following Thursday, she went to town for supplies. It was a routine trip. Same route, same basket, same careful face. She was coming out of the general store when she almost walked directly into Martha Cooley. Martha, round-faced, practical, perpetually apologetic for things that weren't her fault, grabbed Clara's basket to steady it before the flour could tip. "Lord Clara, I'm sorry." She looked up. "You all right?" "Fine," Clara said. "My fault entirely. I wasn't watching." Martha looked at her in that way. She had the careful, sidelong looking that meant she'd noticed something and was deciding whether to say it. "I heard about Jed's land deal," she said. "Yes, it didn't work out." "I'm sorry to hear it." A beat. "He must be—" She stopped, chose her words. "That must be difficult for him." "He's managing," Clara said. Martha held her basket a moment longer than necessary. "Clara," she said quietly, "if you ever need—" "I'm fine, Martha." She took the basket back, smiled the specific kind of smile she'd developed, the one that closed conversations without cruelty. "Give my best to Thomas." She walked away. She did not let herself feel anything about that conversation until she was past the edge of town and on the road home. Then she felt it. The specific loneliness of being almost helped, of someone standing at the edge of saying something real and pulling back. Of the almost always the almost, and the particular ache of a hand extended and then withdrawn. She walked faster. She was halfway home, still on the main road, when she heard hooves coming down from the mountain junction. She did not look up. She knew it was him before she looked up. She didn't know how she knew. She just did. Nathan Cole's bay mare came around the bend at an easy walk, and he saw her on the road, and he slowed. "Mrs. Holt." He touched the brim of his hat. "Mr. Cole." She kept walking. He walked the mare alongside her, slowly matching her pace. She glanced at him. "You can ride on ahead. I'm fine." "I know you are," he said. "I'm in no hurry." She looked forward. They walked, she on foot, he on horseback, for 30 seconds without speaking. "Heard the Henderson deal fell through," he said. She glanced at him. "News travels fast up on Ridgeline. Millfield's not a big town. Things echo." "They do." A pause. "It was a setback for my husband. He'll recover from it." Nathan said nothing to that. She noticed that. The way he didn't fill silences with reassurances he didn't mean. "How's the south fence holding?" he asked. "Fine. Better than fine." "Good." A beat. "You repair fences yourself sometimes before you hired someone passing through." She glanced at him. There was nothing pointed in his expression, just a genuine question. "I used to help my father with property maintenance when I was a girl," she said, "before I was married." "You know what you're doing then?" "I know enough." He nodded. They reached the gate of the Holt property. She stopped. He stopped the mare. "Thank you for the company," she said. "Thank you for letting me provide it," he said. She almost smiled. Almost. She caught it before it arrived on her face. That instinct 3 years trained into her of keeping any genuine expression contained, because genuine expressions gave people something to grab onto. But he saw it anyway. She could tell. Not because he said anything. Because of the quality of his silence, the kind that meant, "I see that, and I'm not going to make anything of it, and I want you to know that I saw it." She went through the gate. She went inside. She did not watch him right away. but she listened to the sound of the mare's hooves until they faded up the mountain road. The following week, everything changed. Not all at once. The way things change in real life, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of small decisions that collect into something irreversible. It started with Jed and a letter. She found it on a Thursday morning, not hidden, left open on the desk in the front room where Jed kept his papers. Whether he had forgotten it or left it deliberately, she couldn't say. But the letterhead was from the Colorado Territorial Bank, and the name at the top was Jedediah Holt, and the numbers in the second paragraph made her hands go cold. The debt was larger than she had thought. Much larger. The bank had extended credit twice in the past year. She'd known about one of those extensions. She hadn't known about the second. She hadn't known about the collateral Jed had offered either. The cabin, the land, her parents' land, the parcel her father had bought, and that had been folded into the property when they married, because the law in Colorado Territory said a wife's assets became a husband's at marriage, and Clara had signed where the lawyer pointed without fully understanding what she was signing. Her parents' land was collateral for a debt she hadn't known about. She folded the letter back exactly as she'd found it. She went to the kitchen. She stood at the sink and ran her hands under the water pump until the cold shocked through her wrists and up her arms. Then she dried her hands. She sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself think the thought she had been refusing to think for 3 years. The thought she'd dressed up in other clothes and called by other names and kept pushing down into the dark part of her chest where she didn't have to look at it. I have to get out. Not someday. Not when it gets bad enough. Not when she had a plan and a destination and enough money and someone to help her and all the conditions that she'd spent 3 years waiting to line up perfectly. Now. I have to start now. I have to make it real. She sat with that for a long time. Then she got up and made lunch. She did not see Nathan Cole for 11 days. She counted without intending to count. On the 12th day, he appeared at the road fence again, not approaching the property, just present, tying his mare to the post and waiting. She saw him from the kitchen window, and she stood there for a moment, and she made a decision. She went outside. "Mr. Cole." "Mrs. Holt." He had something in his hand, a folded paper. "I was in Millfield this morning. The shopkeeper asked me to bring this out to you. Said you'd overpaid last week, and he owed you the accounting." She took the paper. It was a legitimate note from Hanson's General Store, a small credit on her account. "Thank you," she said. "Glad to carry it." She looked at him. He looked at her. The distance between them was appropriate and careful, and both of them were aware of it. "Mr. Cole," she said, "if you were in a situation where something had to change, but you didn't know how to start where the first step was." He went very still, not frozen. Still the way a man goes still when he's listening with everything he has and not just his ears. "What kind of situation?" he asked. She looked at the mountain line. She looked back at him. The kind, she said, where waiting for the right moment had started to feel like a way of never moving at all. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "In my experience," he said slowly, "the first step is usually just acknowledging where you actually are. Not where you're pretending to be, or where you were, where you are right now." She absorbed that. "And the second step?" she asked. "Figure out what you know," he said. "What you actually know, skills, resources, people. Separate that from what you're afraid of. Those are 2 different lists." She looked at him. "That's practical advice. I'm a practical man." "Are you?" He almost smiled, and she saw it the same thing she'd almost done, the pulling back of an expression before it landed, the careful management. He was doing the same thing she was. The recognition of it moved through her like cold water. "My father lost his ranch," Nathan said quietly. Not with the closed quality from before, something more deliberate. "When I was 19, he'd borrowed against it without telling us. The debt called in a bad year. We lost everything in 3 weeks." Clara went still. "After that," he continued, "I spent a long time thinking the lesson was not to trust anything, not land, not people, not circumstances you can't control." He paused. Took me a long time to understand that wasn't the lesson at all. What was the lesson? She asked. That you can rebuild, he said, but only from where you actually are, not from where you wish you were. She looked at him. The Ridgeline place, she said. You built that yourself, over 8 years, started with a tent and a lease on 40 acres. Alone. He met her eyes. Mostly alone, by choice at first, then by habit, then... He stopped. Then, she said. Then habit starts to feel like the only option, he said. And you forget it's still a choice. The silence between them was different from before, heavier, warmer, the kind of silence that carries weight because of what it isn't saying. I have skills, Clara said suddenly. The words came out more direct than she intended. I know accounts. I know how to run a household and manage inventory, and I know livestock management because my father raised cattle before he started the bakery, and he taught me. She paused. I'm saying that I'm not without resources. Nathan looked at her steadily. I know that, he said. I've seen it. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. I am clear about that, he said. I'm just... She stopped. Started again. I needed to say it out loud to someone, that I'm not without resources. He was quiet for a moment. You have more than you think, he said. And the way he said it, not like encouragement, not like flattery, like a man stating a fact he was sure of, went into her chest and stayed there. She nodded once. She folded the shopkeeper's note. Thank you for carrying this out, she said. Any time, he said. She went back inside. She sat at the kitchen table with the store note in her hands and the accounts book and the letter from the bank that she'd memorized and put back exactly as she'd found it, and she opened a fresh page in the back of her own small notebook, the one she kept hidden under the flour tin, and she started writing. The first list. What she knew. What she could do. What was real. Her hand moved across the page, and it was steady. 3 days later, Jed found the notebook. She didn't know how. She was in the yard when he came out of the cabin, and she knew from the way the door opened that something was wrong before she even saw his face. He had the notebook in his hand. She felt everything in her go cold. But she didn't run. She stood in the yard, and she watched him come toward her, and she kept her feet where they were. What is this? He said. Not a question. Never a question. It's a notebook, she said. I can see that. He held it open. What is this list? It's inventory, she said. What we have in the house, what we need, what I know how to do. I was thinking about whether we could reduce household costs given the bank situation. He stared at her. The bank situation, he repeated. I found the letter, she said. On the desk. I wasn't looking for it, but I found it, and I read it, and I want you to know I'm not frightened, and I'm not going to make it worse by talking about it in town. I'm trying to help. Something moved through Jed's face. The calculation behind it, she could see it working. The anger at her having the information balanced against the fact that the information was real, and the response she was offering was useful to him. You had no business reading that letter, he said. It was open on the desk, she said. I understand it was private, but I read it and I can't unread it. He was very close to her now. She did not step back. I'm your wife, she said, quietly. I have a stake in this property too. My father's land is part of that collateral. She held his gaze. I'm not your enemy, Jed. I'm telling you I want to help. The words cost her. Not because they weren't partly true. She did want things to be different. She did want the crisis to be manageable, but because she was also using them. Buying time. And she had never thought of herself as someone who used words strategically against another person. She was learning. He threw the notebook at the fence post. It hit and fell in the dirt. Stay out of my business, he said. Then he went back inside. Clara picked up the notebook. She brushed the dust off the cover. Her hands were steady. That mattered. She went to the fence post, and she stood there for a moment looking up the mountain road north toward the ridge, toward the split pine and the 40 acres, and the man who had spent 8 years building something alone. You can rebuild, he had said. but only from where you actually are. She was exactly where she actually was, and she was beginning to understand that clearly for the first time in 3 years. She put the notebook under her arm. She went back inside. She had work to do. She kept the notebook under the flour tin for 6 more days. Every morning she added something to the list. Not dramatically, not with the feeling of a woman making a grand plan, with the quiet, methodical focus of someone who had decided that information was the only weapon she could trust. She knew the account numbers. She knew the collateral. She knew the debt figure down to the dollar. She knew that her father's land, the northeast parcel, 18 acres of good grazing ground that her father had bought with 15 years of bakery earnings, was listed in the bank's ledger under Jedediah Holt's name. Not hers. His. She had signed that over on her wedding day without understanding what she was signing. She had been 24 years old and in a cream-colored dress, and her mother had been crying the good kind of tears, and the lawyer had said, "Just here, Mrs. Holt, and here," and she had signed because that was what you did. That was what women did in 1882 in Millfield, Colorado. She was 27 now, and she understood every line of that document. The question was what she could do about it. On a Saturday morning, Jed left early for a meeting with his lawyer in Glenwood Springs, a 2-day ride which meant he would be gone until Monday at the earliest. He told her this the night before, not as information shared between equals, but as a schedule she was expected to keep in his absence. Feed the horses. Don't go to town more than once. Have supper ready Monday evening. She said yes to all of it. She watched him ride out before sunrise. Then she sat at the kitchen table with her notebook and her coffee, and she let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in weeks. 2 days. She had 2 days. Not to run. She wasn't ready to run. She didn't have enough yet, and running without enough was just trading one kind of desperation for another. She had learned that from watching other women in Millfield try it. The ones who left without a plan came back inside a month usually worse off than before, because Jed was right about one thing: a woman alone on the frontier with no money and no connections and nowhere to go was a woman in serious danger. She wasn't going to be that woman, but she had 2 days to move some pieces into position. She started with the bank. The Millfield Territorial Bank was a narrow 2-story building between the land office and the post office, run by a man named Gerald Fitch, who had known Clara's father and who looked at Clara with the particular expression of a man who felt guilty about something and had decided the best response to guilt was efficient professionalism. She had been inside the bank exactly 4 times in 3 years. Always with Jed. Always silent. She walked in alone on Saturday morning, and Gerald Fitch looked up from his desk, and something shifted in his face. "Mrs. Holt," he said, "is everything?" "Everything is fine," she said. She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited. "I have some questions about the property accounts, specifically the collateral arrangements." Gerald Fitch looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the door. She said, "I am here in my capacity as a property owner. The northeast parcel, the original Whitmore land, is listed as collateral on your accounts. I'd like to understand the terms of that arrangement." "Mrs. Holt, those accounts are in your husband's name. My father's land is in those accounts," she said. Her voice was very quiet and very clear. "I'd like to understand what I signed in 1882, Mr. Fitch, and I'd like to understand what my rights are regarding property that was originally in the Whitmore name." Gerald Fitch was quiet for a long moment. He was a decent man. She had always known that. Decent in the way of men who operated inside unjust systems and told themselves that decency within the system was enough. "Clara," he said. First name. She noticed that. The shift from professional distance to something closer. "Clara, there isn't much I can—" "I'm not asking you to do anything against the law," she said. "I'm asking you to tell me what the law says. What I signed. What the terms are. What the bank's position would be if the debt were satisfied by a different means." He looked at her steadily. "The northeast parcel," he said slowly. "The Whitmore land." "Yes, that parcel was deeded into the joint account at the time of marriage, under current territorial law." "I know what territorial law says," she said. "I'm asking about the bank's internal position. If that parcel were the subject of a separate arrangement. If someone were to purchase that land outright at current valuation, what would the bank's position be on releasing it from the collateral arrangement? Gerald Fitch leaned back in his chair. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen directed at her in years. Respect. Real respect. The bank would be in a position to consider it, he said carefully, if the offer met the valuation, and if the account holder... He paused. If there were proper documentation regarding the arrangement. How much? She said. He told her the number. She had already known the number, she'd calculated it from the ledger, but hearing it spoken aloud by another person made it real in a different way. She stood up. Thank you, Mr. Fitch. Clara. He stood too. I want you to know your father was a good man. I've thought about... He stopped. He was a good man. I know, she said. She walked out of the bank into the August heat. She stood on the wooden sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the mountain line to the north. She knew what she needed. She knew exactly how much. The question now was whether she had the courage to ask for it. She rode north that afternoon. She had not been on horseback alone in over a year. Jed didn't like her taking the horses without reason, but the old mare in the barn was hers by any honest accounting. A fact Jed had technically acknowledged by occasionally referring to it as your horse when it was convenient for him to do so. She saddled the mare herself. The mountain road was quiet. The heat sat heavy over the lower valley, but broke as she climbed, replaced by the dry cool that lived above 7,000 feet. She breathed it in. She hadn't realized how starved she'd been for open air, for sky that wasn't filtered through a cabin window. She found the split pine without difficulty. She took the left fork. The ridgeline property announced itself by the quality of its fencing before she could see the buildings tight. Well-maintained, the kind of fence built by someone who understood that property care was not optional, but essential. She had noticed this in Nathan Cole. The way he treated practical things as though they deserved real attention. She came around a bend and the ranch house appeared. Small. Well-built. A barn in better condition than the house which told her everything about this man's priorities. 2 horses in the paddock. A kitchen garden on the south side, planted with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who grew food because they needed it, not for appearance. She stopped her mare at the gate. Nathan came out of the barn before she called. He saw her, and he went still. Not surprised exactly. More like a man absorbing something that required a moment to fully arrive. Then he walked to the gate. Mrs. Holt, he said. Mr. Cole, she said. I need to talk to you, if you have time. He looked at her face. He opened the gate. I've got time, he said. They sat at the workbench outside the barn, not inside the house, which she was grateful for, because inside the house would have felt like something she wasn't ready for, some implication she wasn't prepared to manage. The workbench was practical. It was outside. It was 2 people talking in plain air. She told him everything. Not emotionally. She had made a decision on the ride up that she was going to present this as information, as a situation, as a problem, requiring a practical solution. And she was not going to cry, and she was not going to ask for sympathy, and she was not going to put him in the position of responding to a woman falling apart. She told him about the debt, about the collateral, about the Whitmore parcel, about the number Gerald Fitch had given her. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You want to buy back your father's land, he said. I want to purchase the parcel outright from the bank before Jed defaults on the loan, she said. If that happens, the bank takes everything, including the Whitmore land. If I can buy it separately, if I can get the bank to release it from the collateral arrangement for a fair price, then I have something. Something in my name. Something real. Under territorial law, a wife's property. I know what the law says, she said. I have a contact in Glenwood Springs, a woman whose husband is a lawyer. She helped another woman in my situation establish a separate property claim through a family inheritance arrangement. It's not simple, but it's possible. Nathan looked at her steadily. You've been planning this for a while, he said. I've been thinking about it for a while, she said. Planning requires resources. A pause. "How much?" he asked. She told him. He didn't react to the number. "I'm not asking you for money," she said immediately. "I want to be absolutely clear. I'm not here asking you for charity or a loan or—" "What are you asking?" he said. She stopped. She had rehearsed this on the ride up. She had known exactly what she was going to say. But sitting across from Nathan Cole, at a workbench in the afternoon mountain light, with the truth of what she needed, pressing against the pride she'd managed to keep intact through 3 years of everything else, the rehearsed words wouldn't come. "Work," she said. "I'm asking about work. If you need someone who can keep accounts, manage inventory, handle correspondence, anything that a literate person with bookkeeping skills could do for a ranch operation." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking if there's a transaction that could work for both of us. Something I could earn." Nathan was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that was doing something, turning things over, weighing them. "My accounts are a mess," he said finally. She blinked. "I do the work. I don't do the paperwork." He looked at her. "I've got 3 years of supply records in a box in the barn that aren't organized into anything useful. I've got correspondence with 2 cattle buyers that I haven't answered in 6 weeks because I don't know what to say. I've got a lease renewal coming up on the north pasture, and I don't know if the terms are fair because I don't have my previous years sorted well enough to compare." She stared at him. "That sounds like about 40 hours of work," she said. "At least," he said. "I could do that." "I know you could." The silence between them stretched out. "Nathan," she said first name for the first time, and she heard it land differently, felt it change the air. "If Jed finds out I came here, he won't hear it from me. He might hear it from someone else. I passed 2 riders on the lower road. Those were the Hartley boys. They mind their own business." He paused. "Mostly." She almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised her so much that she pressed her hand to her mouth. Nathan watched her do it. "When can you start?" he asked. She lowered her hand. "Monday," she said. "Jed won't be back until Monday evening. I need to be home before dark." He nodded. "I'll have the box of records out of the barn," he said. She stood. He stood. They were closer than they'd been at the fence line, close enough that she could see the gray threading through the dark of his stubble, the way years of squinting into mountain sun had cut lines at the corners of his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she said. He looked at her. "Because you asked," he said simply. "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a moment. "Because you're capable of handling your own situation," he said, "and you shouldn't have to fight for the tools to do it. Because your father's land should be yours." He paused. "And because I know what it's like to have something taken that should have been yours to keep." She held that. "I'll be here Monday at first light," she said. She rode home in the long summer evening, and she did not let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just done until she was back in the valley, back inside the fence line, back in the yard of the cabin. Then she sat on the porch steps in the fading light. She had asked for something. She had asked for what she needed, and she had not apologized for needing it. She pressed both palms flat against the porch boards, solid, real, rough-grained wood beneath her hands. "This is where you actually are," Nathan had said. She knew exactly where she was, and for the first time in 3 years, she had a direction. Monday came back wrong. She knew it before Jed's horse appeared on the road. She knew it the way she'd learned to read the weather, not from the sky, but from something older and more physical. The feeling in her own chest that said, "Something has already happened that you don't know about yet." He rode in at 2 in the afternoon, half a day early. She was at the kitchen table with Nathan's supply records spread in front of her. She'd ridden up Sunday and collected them, telling herself it was efficient, telling herself she needed to use every available hour, not quite admitting to herself that part of her simply wanted to go back. She heard the horse. She moved fast. She gathered the papers, slid them into the flour sack she'd been using to carry them, and had the sack back under the kitchen cabinet, and was standing at the stove by the time Jed came through the door. She breathed. She turned. His face told her immediately. It was not the controlled fury of the failed land deal. This was different. This was something that had curdled longer, a specific kind of cold that she had learned to be more afraid of than heat. "Jed," she said, "you're home early." "Meeting finished early," he said. He looked at the table, the empty table, the coffee cup she'd been using that she'd moved to the counter but hadn't washed yet. "Sit down," she said. "I'll get you something." "Bill Dawson sends his regards," Jed said. She stilled. Bill Dawson lived 3 properties east. Bill Dawson had a view of the mountain road from his front window. "That's kind of him," she said. "Says he saw you on the mountain road Saturday afternoon." Jed's voice was conversational. Carefully conversational. Heading north. She turned to face him. She had decided in the 3 seconds since he said Bill Dawson's name that she was not going to lie. Not because lying was beneath her, now she'd been lying by omission for 3 years, and she understood it as survival. But because she had looked at Jed's face, and she understood that he already knew the answer to the question he was about to ask, and a caught lie right now would be more dangerous than a managed truth. "I rode up to the Ridgeline property," she said. The silence was absolute. "Nathan Cole's operation," she said. "I went to ask about part-time bookkeeping work." Jed looked at her. "You went to a man's property," he said. "Alone." "I went to discuss work," she said. "Given our financial situation, I thought—" "You thought." The words came out very flat. "You went to another man's property without telling me, and you thought—" "Jed." He moved so fast she barely registered it. His hand caught her arm, not her face, not this time. His hand around her forearm grip hard enough that she felt the bones press together, hard enough that she gasped before she could stop herself. "You don't make decisions about work without me," he said. Low, controlled, worse than shouting. "You don't go to another man's property alone. You don't—" "Let go of my arm," she said. The words surprised them both. She felt it, the surprise move through his grip, a half-second of genuine shock that she had said it that way. Not begging, not apologizing. Direct. His grip tightened. "Let go of my arm," she said again. "You're hurting me." "Clara." "You are hurting me, Jed. Let go." He let go. Not because he wanted to. She saw that clearly this was not him choosing restraint. This was something he'd encountered that he didn't have an immediate category for. Clara pulled her arm back. She looked at him. "I went to discuss work," she said. "Legitimate compensated work. Given that the bank account has a gap that needs addressing, and I have skills that can help address it. That's all I did." "You had no business." "I had every business," she said. "This is my household too. My father's land is in that collateral. I have a stake in what happens to it." Jed stared at her. She watched the thing working in him, the calculation, the anger, the unfamiliar experience of encountering resistance that didn't immediately collapse. "You're done with that," he said. "Jed, you're done with it. Whatever conversation you had with Cole, it's over. You stay on this property and you do your work here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "All right." 2 words. Quiet. Agreeable. She watched the tension leave his shoulders slightly. The satisfaction of a man who believed he had reasserted his authority. She turned back to the stove. "All right" did not mean what he thought it meant. She knew that. She suspected on some level that she had always been capable of that distinction. Of saying one thing and meaning another. Of moving in the space between what she said and what she intended as carefully as she moved through any other dangerous terrain. She had just never before understood that this skill was a form of strength. She went back to Nathan's property 2 days later. Not on horseback, too visible. She walked the back way through the Henderson pasture and up through the tree line, a route that added 40 minutes but kept her off the main road entirely. She arrived at the ranch fence line, breathing hard from the climb, and found Nathan already at the paddock gate. He had heard her coming. Or maybe he had seen her from higher ground. Either way, he was there, and he looked at her arm. She was wearing long sleeves despite the heat, and he looked at her face. He did not say anything about either. "Records are on the workbench," he said. "Good," she said. She worked for 3 hours. His financial records were as advertised, a genuine disaster. 3 years of supply receipts in no particular order, correspondence mixed in with cattle sale records, a lease agreement that he'd been paying on for 8 years without having the original terms documented anywhere accessible. She sorted. She organized. She created a ledger structure that would actually function going forward. She found 2 instances where he had been overcharged by a feed supplier and had never caught it because the records weren't organized well enough to compare year to year. "You've overpaid Hanson's by about $12 across 2 years, she said, not looking up from the ledger. "He may not have done it intentionally, but you should ask him about it." "I'll ask him," Nathan said. He was mending tack at the other end of the bench. He had given her the space to work without hovering, which she appreciated. "Your lease terms are fair," she continued. "Better than fair, actually. Current rates in this area are about 8% higher than what you're paying. You negotiated well." "Lucky," he said. "Luck doesn't create fair terms," she said. "That's preparation." He looked up. She kept writing. After a moment he said, "Clara." She stopped. "Your arm," he said quietly. "Is it?" "It's fine." "Clara." She put the pen down. She looked at him. And for one unguarded moment, just one, she let him see it. The weight of it. All of it. 3 years and one Monday afternoon. And the specific way. A grip that wasn't even the worst of it could unmoor something in you that you'd worked so hard to keep in place. He looked back at her. He didn't cross the bench. He didn't reach for her. He just said, "You don't have to go back there." The simplicity of it knocked the breath out of her. Not because she hadn't thought it, because she had thought it in circles and tangles, and with every possible complication attached: the property, the money, the law, the town, the places a woman alone in 1885 could go, and the places she couldn't. And Nathan had said it without any of the complications, like it was simply true, regardless of what surrounded it. "You don't have to go back there." "I do," she said. "Not permanently, but I'm not ready. Not yet." "What do you need?" he asked. She had been waiting for someone to ask her that for 3 years. She felt it in her throat, the emotion she had promised herself she wasn't going to show, and she pushed it back down and kept her voice even. 3 weeks, she said. Maybe 4. I need to work enough to cover the parcel valuation. I need to get the documentation from Glenwood Springs. I need... She stopped. I need a plan that has all its pieces before I move. Because if I move too soon and it falls apart, I end up with nothing. And nothing is worse than this. Nathan was quiet. "Is it?" he asked, gently, not challenging, genuinely asking. She thought about it. "Barely," she said. He nodded. 3 weeks, he said. "You work what hours you can get to. I'll pay you fair. We don't talk about it in town, and we don't give anyone a reason to look at this sideways." He paused. "And if at any point the situation at that cabin gets to a place where it's not safe." "I know how to reach you," she said. "You do," he said. She picked up the pen. She went back to work. Outside, the summer afternoon carried on around them. Horses in the paddock, wind off the mountain. The sound of ordinary life, continuing despite everything. She had been carrying too much alone for too long. For the first time in 3 years, she set some of it down on a workbench in mountain light, and kept going. The town found out on a Thursday. Not all of it, not the truth of it, but enough the way rumors in small towns are never the truth and never entirely false, but something worse. A shape that suggests the truth without the context that makes it make sense. She heard it from Martha Cooley, who appeared at her gate on Thursday morning with a loaf of bread and the expression of a woman delivering bad news under the cover of a social visit. "I thought you should know," Martha said carefully. "People are talking about you going up to the Ridgeline place. Someone saw you on the Henderson pasture path." She paused. "They're saying..." Another pause. "Clara, they're saying things that aren't fair to you." Clara looked at her. "What are they saying?" Martha pressed her lips together. "Martha," Clara said, "tell me exactly what they're saying. That you've been meeting with Cole alone. That you've been going up there regularly." Martha's voice dropped. "Ruth Calloway told Edna Fisher that you..." She stopped. That it isn't just bookkeeping. Clara absorbed this. The cold in her chest spread. Not because the accusation hurt her personally. She had stopped caring about Millfield's opinion of her in ways she hadn't even fully recognized until this moment. But because she knew what it meant for Nathan, and she knew what it meant for Jed. How many people, she asked. It was at the church circle last night. So, Martha gestured helplessly. Most of the women, which means most of the men by now. Clara thanked her. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table. She thought clearly and quickly the way she'd been teaching herself to think. Jed would hear it today. If he hadn't already. What he heard would depend on who got to him first. And in Millfield, the men talked at the saloon and the land office, and both of those were places Jed went regularly, and where people with particular agendas liked to land particular pieces of information at particular moments. She looked at the clock. Jed was at the land office now. He'd left 2 hours ago. She had maybe until noon. She stood up. She made a decision. She did not wait for Jed to bring it home. She walked into town. She found him at the land office. She could see him through the window talking to the clerk, and she went to the door and she knocked twice and opened it. The clerk looked at her. Jed turned. "Clara," he said. "I heard what's going around," she said. "I wanted to talk to you before someone else got to it first." The clerk made himself busy at the filing cabinet. Jed's face was doing the calculation. She stepped fully into the room. "I've been doing bookkeeping work at the Ridgeline property," she said, clearly, loudly enough that the clerk could hear if he was listening. 3 days for compensation. I disclosed the first visit to you. The subsequent work I should have discussed with you first, and I understand why you're angry about that." She paused. "But what people are saying is not what happened, and I thought you deserved to hear that from me directly, rather than from Bill Dawson or Ruth Calloway." Jed stared at her. The clerk was definitely listening. "We can talk about it at home," she said. "But I wanted you to know what they're saying is not what happened. And I'll say that clearly to anyone in this town who asks me." She turned. She walked out. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the sidewalk, not from fear, or not entirely from fear, but from the energy of having done something that 3 years ago she would not have believed herself capable of. She had walked into a room. She had said the true thing. She had not apologized for existing. She kept walking. She was halfway down the main street when she heard boots on the wooden sidewalk behind her. Not Jed's. The footfall was wrong lighter, and she turned. Nathan Cole was standing in front of the general store. He had a paper-wrapped parcel from the store in one hand and his hat in the other. He had seen her come out of the land office. She could tell from his face that he had understood immediately what it meant. They looked at each other across 30 feet of Main Street. Around them, Millfield went about its Thursday business and also watched. She could feel the watching. She knew how this looked. She knew that every pair of eyes on the street was reading this moment as either evidence for or against the thing they'd already decided. Nathan Cole crossed the street. He crossed it slowly, deliberately, not trying to look casual, not performing indifference, just walking toward her the way a man walks toward someone he is walking toward. He stopped in front of her. "You all right?" he said quietly. "Jed's in the land office," she said, equally quiet. "You should probably—" "Are you all right?" he said again. She looked at him. "No," she said. "But I'm managing." He looked at her for one long moment. "I'm going to say something in this street right now," he said, quiet, deliberate, "because I think you should not be the only one who has to stand here and be clear about what's true." She shook her head slightly. "Nathan." He turned, not toward her, toward the street. His voice came out even and carrying not loud, but with the particular quality of a voice that expected to be heard. "Mrs. Holt has been doing legitimate bookkeeping work at my property," he said. "She is a skilled accountant, and I hired her for that work. Anyone with questions about that can speak to me directly." The street had gone very quiet. Clara felt her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Nathan turned back to her. "There," he said quietly. "Now at least the true version is in the air alongside the other one." She looked at him. That's going to make things harder, she said. I know, he said. Jed will. I know. She looked at his face, the steadiness of it, the absolute lack of performance. Why? She said. Because somebody needed to say it, he said simply. And because you shouldn't have to carry the whole weight of being honest in this town by yourself. Clara Whitmore stood on the main street of Millfield, Colorado, on a Thursday in August of 1885, and she felt something shift in the architecture of who she was. Not healed, not rescued, something more basic than either of those. She felt witnessed. By a town that was watching for the wrong reasons, yes, but also by one person who was watching for the right ones. And that distinction, she realized, was everything. She straightened her spine. She picked up her basket. I need to get home before Jed does, she said. Be careful, Nathan said. She nodded. She walked. She did not look back. But she walked differently than she had in a very long time. She walked like a woman who had somewhere to be and something to do and a self-worth protecting. And in Millfield, Colorado, on a Thursday in August, that was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. Jed was home before her. She knew it before she opened the gate. His horse was tied at the post instead of the barn, which meant he hadn't bothered to unsaddle it, which meant he had come home fast and with a specific purpose. She went through the gate anyway. She closed it behind her. She walked to the porch and she opened the front door and she went inside. Jed was sitting at the kitchen table. Not standing. Sitting. Which was somehow worse than standing, the deliberate quality of it. The man who had decided to wait rather than pace. Who had made himself sit down and be still. Because stillness was a form of control he was very good at. Shut the door, he said. She shut it. She set her basket on the counter. She turned to face him. I heard what Cole said in the street, Jed said. His voice was quiet, conversational, the most dangerous register he had. I want to hear your version. My version is the same as his, she said. I've been doing bookkeeping work, that's all it is. You stood in the middle of Main Street with that man. He came to me, she said. I didn't plan it. And you let him speak for you. She looked at him. He spoke for himself, about his own business arrangements. He has every right to do that. Jed stood up. She held her ground. 3 years, he said. He walked toward her slowly. 3 years I've provided for you, housed you, fed you, and you go behind my back to another man's property and then stand in the street while he makes a public statement about my wife. He made a statement about his employee, she said. You are not his employee, you are my wife. I can be both. The silence after that was total. She had never said anything like that to him. Not in 3 years. Not once. She watched it land, watched the way it moved through him like a stone through still water, the ripples of it going out in every direction. Jed's hand came up. She stepped back, not from fear. This time, not the instinctive flinch she'd spent years trying to train herself out of. A decision. A deliberate movement that said, I see what you're about to do, and I am removing myself from its reach. Don't, she said. One word. He stopped. She did not know if he stopped because of the word, or because something in her posture was different from every other time. She did not stop to analyze it. She used the half-second his hesitation gave her. If you hit me today, she said, voice steady as anything she had ever said in her life, I will go to Gerald Fitch tomorrow morning, and I will begin the process of separating the Whitmore parcel from your accounts. And I will send a letter to your lawyer in Glenwood Springs, informing him of every incident I have documented in my notebook over the past 18 months. Jed stared at her. What notebook? He said. The one you threw at the fence post, she said. That was a copy. It wasn't true. She had made it true 3 days after the fence post incident, sitting at Nathan's workbench while he worked in the barn, copying every entry into a second notebook in careful dated handwriting. Jed looked at her for a very long time. The calculation behind his eyes was almost visible. You've been planning this, he said. I've been protecting myself, she said. There's a difference. He turned away from her. He walked to the window. She breathed. She did not let the breath show. "You're not going back up there," he said. "To his property." She said nothing. "Clara." "I heard you," she said, which was not agreement. He turned back. He saw her face. He understood the distinction. Something in him recalculated again. "This isn't over," he said. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." He went to the back room. Clara stood in the kitchen and pressed both palms flat on the counter and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. She had 3 weeks left, maybe less now. She needed to move faster. She sent the letter to Glenwood Springs the next morning. Not the letter she'd mentioned to Jed that had been strategy buying time. This was a different letter to a woman named Helen Marsh, whose husband was a territorial attorney, a woman she'd heard about through Martha Cooley 18 months ago, and had been quietly corresponding with for the past 6 weeks through the post office box she'd opened in her own name without telling Jed. The letter outlined her situation and asked one direct question: was a separate property claim on the Whitmore parcel legally achievable before a default judgment? She sent it. She went home. She cooked supper. She set the table. She sat across from Jed, and she ate, and she answered his questions in flat, accurate, unrevealing sentences, and she did not let a single thing she was thinking show on her face. Jed watched her all through the meal. He was trying to read her. He couldn't. That was new too. She used to be entirely readable to him. She had been for years, because she hadn't understood that being readable was a choice, that you could close certain rooms in yourself and only show the hallway. She understood it now. He had closed rooms in himself her whole marriage. She had only just learned to close hers. 4 days passed. Jed did not hit her. She understood this was not restraint so much as recalibration. He was watching her, trying to figure out what had changed and how much, trying to find the edges of whatever she'd become so he could work around them. She let him watch. She gave him nothing to find. On the 5th day, she went to town for supplies and stopped at the post office, and there was a letter from Helen Marsh. She read it standing at the post office counter. The answer was yes. Not simple, not without risk. But yes, a property claim on the Whitmore parcel was achievable through an existing legal mechanism in Colorado territory that recognized original family land grants under specific conditions. Helen's husband had handled 2 similar cases. He would need original documentation of her father's purchase. He would need the bank's cooperation or a court order. And he would need Clara to be willing to file openly in her own name against her husband's accounts. Her hands were shaking when she folded the letter. She folded it twice, put it inside her dress. She walked to the general store. She bought flour and salt and a tin of coffee. She smiled at Hanson. She walked home. She went to the back bedroom, where she kept a small locked box under the floorboard beneath the bed. Jed didn't know about the floorboard. She'd found it by accident the first winter when a board shifted under her weight and she took out her father's original land purchase documents. She had known they were there. She had put them there 2 months ago when she started understanding that she might need them. She held them, her father's handwriting on the bill of sale, his signature, the notary seal from 1873, 12 years ago. Before the bakery, before the wedding, before everything. For my daughter Clara, he had written in the margin of his personal copy, not the legal document, his copy. In pencil so light she almost missed it the first time she found it. Good grazing land. She'll know what to do with it. She pressed the document against her chest. She did not cry. She had not cried in almost a year, but something moved through her deep and old and enormous. The feeling of being known by someone who was no longer there to know her. She put the documents in the flour sack with Nathan's accounting records. She had a plan. She needed one more piece. She got the message to Nathan through a method so ordinary. It was almost funny. She left a note with Hanson at the general store, who was a man of extraordinary discretion, partly by nature, and partly because he'd been quietly in love with Nathan Cole's deceased mother 30 years ago, and retained a particular loyalty to anything connected to that family. Hanson passed the note with a supply delivery. The note said, "I have everything I need except the parcel valuation in writing from the bank. I need Fitch to put the number on paper with a release condition. Can you be in Millfield on Friday? The answer came back the next day. Yes. Bring the documents. Thursday night was the worst night of the 3 years. Not because of what Jed did, because of what he said. He came home from the saloon at 10, not drunk that careful 2 whiskey level, and he sat at the kitchen table while she was washing up, and he talked, not shouted, talked. That particular low, even, relentless talking that he did when he had thought about something for days and decided to lay it out. I know what you're thinking, he said. I've known women who think like you. They get ideas. They think things can be different. They think if they just plan carefully enough. He stopped. They always come back. She kept washing the dishes. You have nowhere to go, Clara, he said. You have no family. You have no money that I don't know about, and I'd know about it. I've been through every account we have. You have no friends in this town who would risk anything for you. Martha Cooley can't even defend herself. And that man up on the mountain. She stopped washing. She didn't turn around. That man isn't going to take on a married woman's legal complications, Jed said. He isn't going to fight a property case and a social scandal and whatever else comes with bringing you into his life. Men like that, quiet men alone. Men, they like the idea of a woman who needs them. They don't like the reality. She turned around. She looked at him. You might be right about some of that, she said. He blinked. He had expected either silence or argument. You might be right, she said again. But you are not right about all of it. And the parts you're wrong about are the parts that matter. She dried her hands. She set the cloth down. I'm going to bed, she said. She walked past him. He did not move to stop her. She lay in the dark, and she did not sleep for a long time. Not because she was afraid, because she was listening to what Jed had said and testing every piece of it against what she knew to be true. He was right that she had no family. He was right that she had no significant money yet. He was right that Martha Cooley would not risk anything. He was not right about Nathan. She was certain of that, with a clarity that surprised her, not because of feeling, not because of the warmth that gathered in her chest when she thought about a workbench in mountain light, because of evidence, because of a man who had crossed a street and spoken clearly when he didn't have to, because of a man who had asked, "What do you need?" and then listened to the answer, because of 8 years of building something alone and calling it choice until he was honest enough with himself to call it habit. Nathan Cole was not a man who helped someone halfway. She knew that the way she knew her father's handwriting. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow was Friday. She was at the bank when it opened. Gerald Fitch saw her come through the door, and something in his expression did what it had done before, that compound movement of guilt and respect and the memory of her father. Clara, he said. Gerald. She sat down. She put the documents on his desk. I need the parcel valuation in writing, with a release condition. I need it today. He looked at the documents. Her father's original purchase papers, the notary seal. Clara, if Jed finds out Jed will find out, she said. I'm not asking you to be secret about it. I'm asking you to do your job. Put the bank's assessed valuation of the northeast parcel on paper and attach the condition under which the bank would release it from the collateral arrangement. That is a standard document in any property negotiation. It is not illegal. It is not a betrayal of my husband. She paused. It is the bank doing what banks do. Gerald Fitch looked at her for a long moment. Your father came to me the year before he died, he said quietly. He was worried about you. She stilled. He asked me if Clara ever needed help, if there was ever a time she came to this bank with a real need. He asked me to do what I could within the law. Gerald's voice was careful. I've been carrying that for 5 years. Clara looked at him. The emotion in her throat was enormous. She swallowed it. Then this is the moment he was talking about, she said. Gerald Fitch nodded once. He picked up his pen. Nathan was at the land office when she came out of the bank. Not by arrangement, she'd only told him to be in town, and the land office was the natural place for a rancher to handle business. He saw her on the sidewalk, and he came out, and she handed him the bank document without preamble. He read it. He looked up. You got him to write it, he said. My father asked him to help me 5 years ago, she said. Her voice was steady. I just gave him the opportunity. Nathan looked at the document again. The valuation is fair, he said. It's within what I'd expect for that acreage. He handed it back. Clara, I want to put the money in. She shook her head immediately. Nathan, not a gift, he said. Not charity, a land investment. I'll put in the purchase amount. You'll hold the deed in your name. When you're able, you pay me back at standard rate. If you can't pay it back within 5 years, I hold a partial interest in the land. He kept his voice very even. It's a business arrangement. It's clean. It's legal. It protects you, and it protects the investment. She stared at him. You've thought about this, she said. I've thought about it for 3 weeks, he said. Since the day you sat at my workbench and told me you weren't asking for anything. She looked at him. I'm not going to be able to... She stopped. I can't promise what happens after. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how this ends. I can't promise you anything. I'm not asking you to promise anything, he said. I'm asking you to let me make a sound investment in 18 acres of good grazing land that should have been yours to begin with. She held the bank document in both hands. She thought about Jed's voice in the dark. That man isn't going to take on a married woman's legal complications. She thought about what she knew to be true. All right, she said. All right, he said. They went back into the bank together. Gerald Fitch looked at them both. He looked at the document. He began to prepare the paperwork. She was home by noon. Jed came home at 3. She was in the kitchen. She had decided on the ride home that she was going to tell him. Not everything. Not the full shape of what had been assembled today. But the essential fact that the Whitmore parcel had been separately purchased and was no longer part of his collateral, because if she didn't tell him and he found out through the bank, the gap between the event and his discovery would be read as deception, and deception in Jed Holt's world justified things that truth did not. She would give him truth. She would give it on her own terms. He came through the door, and she turned from the stove and she said, I need to tell you something. He stopped. He read her face. The Whitmore parcel, she said. I arranged a separate purchase today, through the bank. The parcel has been removed from your collateral arrangement and deeded into my name. The silence was absolute. You did what? He said. I used a legal mechanism available under Colorado territorial law for original family land grants, she said. Gerald Fitch can explain the specifics. The deed is in my name. The bank's collateral arrangement now applies only to the original Holt property. Jed stared at her. She watched it move through him, the shock first, then the fury, then the calculation, then something she hadn't seen before. Something that looked almost like fear. Because he understood now. Whatever she was, whatever she had become, in the weeks he'd been watching her and trying to find the edges of she had moved a piece. He hadn't seen her move. She had done something real, something legal, something permanent. You can't, he started. I already did, she said. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides. His hand found her shoulder the same grip as before, bone deep, and she grabbed his wrist with both her hands and she looked directly into his face. Jed, she said, very quiet. The lawyer in Glenwood Springs has a copy of my notebook. I sent it with the letter last week. Every incident, every date, every time. If something happens to me, that document goes to the county sheriff in Glenwood Springs, who does not answer to your cousin. She held his gaze. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the truth about where we are. He let go. She stepped back. She kept her eyes on him. I'm leaving, she said. Not tonight. I have arrangements to complete. But I'm telling you now so that when I go, you have had the chance to know it was coming. So it cannot be called abandonment. She paused. That's the only courtesy I have left to offer you. Jed stood in the kitchen. She had never seen him look like this. Not angry, she knew his anger in every temperature. This was different. This was a man discovering that the thing he had been certain of, absolutely foundationally certain of, was not what he'd believed it to be. He had believed she would never go. He had built the entirety of his behavior on that belief. And she was standing in his kitchen in the flat afternoon light, telling him plainly, without drama, without cruelty, that he had been wrong. "You have nowhere," he started. "I have 18 acres, she said. "And I have skills. And I have my father's name on a deed." She picked up the dishcloth. She turned back to the stove. "Supper will be ready at 6. She stayed 11 more days. Not from fear, not from indecision. She had made a list. She was always making lists now of what had to happen before she left. The second copy of the notebook had to be confirmed received in Glenwood Springs. She needed to collect 3 things from the cabin that were hers and could not be replaced. She needed to time her departure for a morning when Jed would be away long enough that she could be well clear of the valley before he knew. She needed to say something to Martha Cooley, not to ask for help. Martha couldn't offer any that was real. But because Martha had stood at her gate with bread and a warning, and that small thing deserved to be acknowledged. She found Martha on Wednesday at the church. "I wanted to thank you," Clara said, "for coming to tell me." Martha looked at her, at Clara's face. She saw something there, something that made her eyes go wide and then go soft. "Clara," she said. "I'm all right," Clara said. "I wanted you to know that." Martha pressed her lips together hard. "Is there anything?" "No," Clara said. "But thank you, genuinely." She walked away. She did not look back, but she heard Martha behind her very quietly say something. It sounded like, "Good for you." Maybe she imagined it, maybe not. The night before she left, Jed came to the bedroom doorway. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. He stood in the door for a long time without speaking. Finally he said, "I didn't mean for it to be like this." She looked at him. She thought about what it would cost her to say "I know," whether it was true enough to be worth saying. "I believe you," she said. "In the beginning. I believe you didn't mean for it to be like this in the beginning." He leaned against the doorframe, for one strange sideways moment. He looked like the man she had stood next to at the altar. Not good, not kind, but human. A person rather than a force. "Where will you go?" he said. "I have land," she said. "I'll figure out the rest." He looked at the floor. "Nathan Cole," he said. Not an accusation this time, an acknowledgement. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said honestly. "I'm not leaving for another person. I'm leaving because this—" She stopped. "Because this isn't a life, and I'd rather have nothing and be honest about it than have this and pretend." Jed said nothing for a long time. Then, "Your father would have hated me." "Yes," she said. "He would have." He pushed off the doorframe. He walked down the hall. She heard the front door open. She heard him sit on the porch. She lay down on the bed. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. But when she slept without listening. For the first time in 3 years, she did not lie in the dark, sorting sounds, categorizing footsteps, reading the weather in the creak of a floorboard. She slept. And in the morning, the last morning, she got up before the sun. She dressed. She took her 3 things from the place she'd hidden them. She took the flour sack. She took her father's documents. She left the kitchen clean. She did not leave a note. There was nothing she needed to say in writing that she had not already said standing on her own 2 feet. She went to the barn. She saddled her horse. She rode north. The valley was still dark below her when she came around the first ridge, and the sky opened up, stars fading, that specific deep blue that comes before color returns to the world. The mountain air so clean, it felt like something she hadn't been allowed to have. She did not look back, not because looking back was weakness, but because there was nothing behind her that she needed anymore. Ahead of her 20 miles north, a lamp was lit in a small ranch house. She knew, because she had learned to know these things about Nathan Cole, that he rose before light, that he lit the lamp in the kitchen first, that he started work before the sun made it necessary. She rode toward the light. And for the first time in 3 years, the direction she was moving felt entirely unmistakably like her own. She arrived at the ridgeline property as the first real light was breaking. Nathan was at the paddock gate when she came around the last bend. Not because he had been watching for her, she thought, but because he had been doing the morning feeding and had heard the mare's hooves on the upper trail. He stood at this gate with a bucket in one hand, and he watched her come in. She rode up to the fence and stopped. He looked at her face. He looked at the flour sack across the saddle. He set the bucket down. "You left this morning," he said. "Yes," she said. "You all right?" "Yes." He opened the paddock gate. She rode the mare through. He took the reins while she dismounted, and when she was on the ground and had both feet under her, she realized her legs were shaking, not from fear, from the long ride and the cold morning air, and the particular physical response of a body that had been carrying enormous tension for weeks, and was only now in this specific moment beginning to understand that it could release some of it. Nathan noticed. "I didn't say anything about it." He tied the mare, and he picked up the bucket. "Coffee's on," he said. She followed him inside. The kitchen was small and entirely functional. A man's kitchen, meaning nothing. In it was there for appearance. She sat at the table, and he poured coffee and set it in front of her, and sat across from her, and waited. She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I told him last night I was going," she said. "I didn't sneak out. I wanted him to know it was coming." Nathan nodded. "He didn't try to stop you this morning. He slept in the front room. He was still asleep when I left." She paused. "Or he was letting me believe that. Either way, he didn't come to the barn." "He may come up here," Nathan said. "I know. He may go to Sheriff Dunmore. I know that too." She looked at him steadily. "Dunmore can't do anything about a woman who legally owns a separate parcel of property and has left her husband's residence. Helen Marsh's husband was very clear about that. The law in this territory doesn't require a woman to remain in a household against her will." She paused. "It doesn't protect her particularly well either, but it can't force her back." Nathan looked at her. "You've covered every piece of this," he said. "I've been covering pieces for 6 weeks," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need right now, this morning?" She thought about it. "To sit here for 10 minutes without planning anything," she said. He said, "All right." He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. They sat in the quiet kitchen while the morning light came fully through and the horses moved in the paddock outside, and the ordinary sounds of the ranch settled around them like something she hadn't known she was homesick for. Ordinary sounds. Sounds that didn't need to be sorted and categorized and read for danger. Just sounds. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Nathan was looking at her with that quality she had come to recognize, the full attention that didn't demand anything back. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready to plan." He almost smiled. "Figured," he said. The first problem arrived before noon. She had expected it to be Jed. It wasn't Jed. It was Bill Dawson's eldest son, Thomas, who rode up the mountain trail at 10:30, with the specific energy of a young man who had been sent to deliver a message and was enjoying the importance of it rather too much. Nathan came out of the barn when he heard the horse. Clara was at the workbench outside, continuing the bookkeeping work she had started weeks ago, because work was what she knew how to do, and it settled her. And Nathan's records still had 3 years of complexity to untangle. She looked up when Thomas Dawson appeared at the fence. He saw her. His eyes went wide. He had clearly not expected her to be there visibly openly in plain sight. He had probably expected something more hidden, more shameful, something that matched the story his parents had been telling. "Mrs. Holt," he said. "Thomas," she said. "Is something wrong?" He looked at Nathan, back at her. "My father sent me. He says Mr. Holt is in town. He's—" The boy hesitated. "He's at the sheriff's office, ma'am. My father thought you should know." Nathan looked at Clara. She set down the pen. "What's he telling Dunmore?" she asked. Thomas shifted in the saddle. "My father says he went in there about an hour ago. Said his wife had abandoned the household and taken property that belonged to him." The boy had the grace to look uncomfortable. "My father said I should tell you that." "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "Thank you for coming up." The boy nodded and turned his horse. After he was gone, Nathan came to the workbench. "He's moving fast," he said. "He moves fast when he thinks he has leverage," she said. "The problem is, he thinks the parcel is still leverage." She looked up. "It isn't. But he doesn't have the bank's paperwork yet. He may not know the purchase went through." "Dunmore will send someone up here." "Probably today," she said. "What do you want to do?" She thought clearly. "I want to be here when they arrive," she said. "I want to have the deed in my hand and Helen's letter in my other hand, and I want Dunmore's man to see me standing on my own property with documentation in order." She paused. "I am not going to hide. Hiding makes it look like I've done something wrong." Nathan studied her face. "You sure?" he said. "I've been sure since the morning I walked into Gerald Fitch's bank and sat down without being invited," she said. Nathan looked at her for one long moment. "I'll be right here," he said. "I know," she said. She picked up the pen. She went back to work. Deputy Cal Morris arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He was a young man, mid-20s, new to the job, the kind of young deputy who was still figuring out whether he was going to be the kind of officer who did right or the kind who did convenient. Clara had seen him in town. He had always nodded to her politely. She had always nodded back. He came to the gate. Nathan was standing at the fence. Clara was beside him. "Afternoon, Cal," Nathan said. "Mr. Cole." The deputy looked at Clara. "Mrs. Holt, I've got a complaint filed by Jedediah Holt at the sheriff's office this morning, alleging abandonment of the marital household and—" He glanced at the paper in his hand. "Unlawful removal of marital property." "What property?" Clara said. Cal looked at the paper again. "The northeast parcel, formerly listed as collateral on Mr. Holt's bank account." "Formerly," she said. "That's correct. It's no longer collateral. It was purchased separately 11 days ago." She held out the deed. "Gerald Fitch at the Millfield Territorial Bank can confirm the—"